Well, hi there, I'm Rachel. I'm deaf, profoundly deaf, and I use New Zealand Sign Language to communicate. And today I have my interpreter Kelly here supporting me to give me a voice so that you can all access what I'm going to be presenting. I'm very proud to be a deaf person, and that may be a bit weird for you, but I'm going to today give you the deaf perspective about what it's like to be deaf, the deaf community, the deaf youth, and our future. I'm going to talk about a different perspective today. I'm going to talk about the deaf perspective. This is my family. This is my parents, my brother, my sister-in-law, and you may not be able to see it, but everybody in that photo is deaf, with the exception of the family dog. My family are really big influences in who I am today and where I've come from. I was born into a deaf family, and so my first language is New Zealand Sign Language, which is one of New Zealand's official languages. Today I want to talk about culture with you. Many of you may not know what deaf culture is, and I'm not going to go into that today. Just merely say that we don't consider ourselves as a disability group, a minority group. We consider ourselves as a minority language group who have a unique culture and a unique language. When I was born, I have actually a little bit of residual hearing, and so my parents thought instead of me going to a deaf school like my brothers and sister, I would go to the mainstream into my local primary school. And so I was in the mainstream, unlike my siblings. And I hadn't really learnt about my own deaf culture and my identity as a deaf person. I lived at home in the deaf world, we signed at home, I had that strong deaf identity, but when I went into the hearing world, I felt like I had to conform, and so I struggled with that for a long time between those two worlds. It's a little bit like when you're born, if your mother tongue is spoken to you and that's what you have at home in your environment, you have particular traditions, you have particular foods and cultural norms that you have, and then you visit a new country and you have to conform to those cultures and those particular norms, and so it's quite difficult because you've had to leave your mother tongue, you've had to leave your own culture, and so for me that's what it felt like. It felt like I was being asked to lose my deaf culture because I had to conform to a hearing world. Now 95% of deaf children are actually born to parents who can hear, and my family is quite unique in the fact that we're all deaf. So I have quite a unique experience compared to a lot of deaf children here in New Zealand. My role in the community was really to develop deaf youth and really help them to find their sense of belonging, their sense of identity. Many of them, like I said, who are born to hearing parents just don't know that side of deafness. All they see it as is a disability, and they don't have any access to the native language that they should have. And I had that access, and I was able to grow as a person, but they didn't. And a lot of hearing parents, when their child is born, they don't realise that deaf people actually can be confident and individuals who are successful. They think that deafness is something that needs to be fixed. And so I really felt like I wanted to give these deaf youth a sense of belonging, a place where they could belong. I have had that lived experience of being able to learn about deaf culture and about deaf identity, but they haven't had that opportunity yet. They haven't met other deaf adults, for example, so I wanted to be able to provide that to them. When I was 14, around the Christchurch earthquake time, I felt like that was such a huge impact on all of us in Christchurch that I really wanted to offer the deaf youth something that they could be involved with. So we set up the Canterbury Deaf Youth Group, and at that time I thought everything was black and white. I was pretty naive. So we established the group, and we achieved a lot in that time, but it just wasn't an easy time. I was still very unsure myself of where I sat in the world. And I was then offered at Deaf Aotearoa a youth services apprenticeship, and that really opened my mind up to the variety and the diversity that we have out there for the deaf youth, you know, the ones that aren't living in deaf families. And so our community is so diverse, and I really wanted to support those out there. So under the youth services, these are a number of initiatives that we actually provided for youth throughout Aotearoa. It was the most amazing time. We felt like we moved mountains during that period. You know, we really had major breakthroughs for our deaf youth. And we had a lot of the same people right from the beginning, from the establishment of the Deaf Youth Group, right through the process. But we couldn't reach those others out there who were isolated in communities that didn't know about other deaf and things like that. So we really wanted to get out there and reach them. Last year I was fortunate enough to be selected to go to the WFD Youth section. That's the World Federation for the Deaf Youth section. It was a camp that was run by that particular organisation. It's an international organisation, and it was in Turkey. And we had a number of youth from all over the world came together and discussed how we could problem solve issues that we were facing at home. And the main common problem that we found was technological advancement, and the fact that technology was being used to fix our deafness. So when a child is born deaf, they will be diagnosed as being deaf through a newborn hearing screening test. And often, a lot of the times, the medical professionals will only offer the option of a cochlear implant. But there are other options. For example, there's an insight into the deaf world as well. So that's not being offered to these youth. You know, there's such diversity out in the world, but a lot of them just couldn't identify with being deaf. And we decided that we couldn't actually just label our deaf youth as being deaf, because there were the profoundly deaf, they're the hearing impaired, there's the hard of hearing, there's those who wear cochlear implants. So we really made sure that our service was really covering everybody. For the last 3 years, we've been coming to the Festival for the Future, and we've made sure that we've supported our deaf youth in coming here. We wanted to support them in learning how, you know, what happens here. There's a lot of inspiring things that go on, and we want them to have access to that. You know, there's not just the one way of the deaf world and how they fit in there, but how do they fit into the hearing world as well? And so we wanted them to have the opportunity to learn and really give them different perspectives, not only the deaf perspective, but other perspectives too. So that's why we come. Guy Ryan actually came to one of our camps that we set up a couple of years ago, and it was amazing because we had that real inclusive environment where deaf youth from all over Aotearoa came, and we just had the most amazing time. And many of the youth you see in this photo actually have cochlear implants and really had difficulty struggling with who they were as deaf people. But by the end of our camp, they had really come to terms with feeling confident and identified as being really successful deaf youth. So we provided a number of initiatives for them to grow in terms of their deaf identity on these particular camps. You know, because it's a very lonely place when you classify yourself as a deaf person who has a disability. You know, you don't fit into the hearing world and you don't fit into the deaf world. And so we wanted to change those negative labels that sit around the term deafness. So these are my other colleagues who actually set up the Deaf Youth Group. So for the last 5 minutes, you've seen that my hands are my voice, my eyes are my ears. And for a long time, deaf people have struggled to understand, to fit in to a hearing world. If you expect us to lip read, we'll only get 30% of what you're saying. 70% is guesswork. So I don't want my children or their children to have to deal with that. I want the world to be equal for everybody. everybody. I want us to collaborate together because we're all human beings. So what am I doing at the moment? Nothing but following my dreams. I might be deaf, but I know that I can. Thank you.